late to what I want to say since somebody's counting the time. So a recent study of Americans showed that most Americans think that we consume too much and then we would be happier and our country would be better off if we consumed less. And interestingly, this opinion is independent of political ideology, left, right, or people's views on environment and climate change. The story of how we got to this highly consuming way of life is quite familiar to many of you. The post-war huge industrial overcapacity during the 1940s refocused itself on civilian production, houses, cars, furnishings, appliances, infrastructure, stuff. The suburban model of a perfect family life was invented. By 1960, the suburban residents, for the first time in the history of the US, outnumbered rural and urban dwellers. Today, 82% of population lives in areas with 4 or less housing units per acre. And only 4% of the population lives in hyper-dense urban areas, which are defined as 30 units per acre. And we have become a consumer society. I mean by consumer society, a society where the economy, national economy, depends largely on private consumption to prop it up, and where mass acquisition and use of material goods is the dominant lifestyle, the centerpiece of social practices, leisure time, cultural rituals, and celebrations. This massive collective shift in lifestyle since Second World War exacts, as we all know, very high ecological price. What is less often discussed is how profoundly it has shaped people's aspirations and the notion of what good life is. Think about it. In a span of essentially one generation, consumerism and suburban lifestyles have become conflated with such fundamental values as well-being, autonomy, and what it means to be an American. Another striking thing about this huge transformation in the 40s and 50s is that it was a deliberate construct, not some historical inevitability. It was shaped by coordinated effort of government, infrastructure, mortgage deductions, and so on, and other policies. Organized labor, which pushed hard for higher wages and not, for example, longer vacations. And of course, the business community. So if this is a construct, and if such a massive cultural transformation could happen in such a short period of time, then we should consider that a change beyond the consumerist lifestyle model and values is also possible and in fact achievable. So the challenge is to reduce the ecological impact while fostering human well-being. In essence, that's what it is. Technology is an ally in this quest. Renewables, efficiency improvements, new materials, and so on. And cities are excellent places to exercise this technological approach. Per capita carbon footprint of city dwellers is about 30% lower than in suburbs. That footprint can be significantly lowered through technology and infrastructure. For example, greater density, construct buildings to the passive house standard, which is a zero energy building, maybe through legislation, solar energy, and so on. Urban density is an opportunity for creative solutions in personal mobility and access. But technology alone cannot get the job done. For one thing, the reductions are just not large enough that we can provide. And efficiency gains, as many know at this point, have various rebound effects. So what we think we will achieve, we don't really achieve to that level. So of course, we need a shift toward lifestyles which are less dependent on material consumption. What could drive such a collective transition in lifestyles? And who could the agents of change be? Top-down policy? Well, we can use policy instruments to modify behaviors, for example, carbon tax or outlawing incandescent light bulbs, and so on. But in the political sphere of today, there is really very little appetite for policies that would dramatically change consumption patterns and lifestyles. Environmental movements? Well, there is abundant evidence that concerns about the environment is a weak and short-lived motivator for adopting small footprint lifestyles. So if not a moral imperative and not top-down public policy, then what? Well, my proposal is this. If people reframe their collective conception of well-being in a way that is less tied up with material consumption, then there is a chance that lifestyle choices may also shift. I stress well-being because the strive for well-being is a powerful and sustained force in everybody's life. Is such a reframing of well-being possible? Well, here I want to draw on research, large body of research on what makes people happy and what gives them a sense of well-being. And I will highlight just 3 major findings from the body of research. 1, there is a remarkable consistency in the basic determinants of human happiness, whether you study it in Japan, Afghanistan, or the US. Stable marriage, good health, membership in a community, friendships, autonomy, social class. Not material wealth per se, which is not to say that material wealth is not relevant. And that leads me to the second finding from this body of research. As a species, we are deeply social. We realize ourselves through relationships with others, and we judge our position in life in relation to others. We are wired that way. It is of greater importance to be ahead of others than to be ahead. In a society such as ours, where one's success in life is measured through material consumption, there is of course a tendency to pursue material wealth without end. There's a classic MIT experiment where students, almost all students, stated that they would rather have a lower salary that was higher than everybody else than have a higher salary that was lower than the average. Now, the third observation about human well-being and happiness is that people adapt very quickly to new circumstances, worse or better. So, with a sense of well-being, always tending toward the pre-change status. So, in a society, again, such as ours, where well-being is conflated with material acquisitions, this leads to insatiability. Aspirations increase with income. The baseline of what is necessary and normal keeps getting higher. Well, if you take it together, especially observation 2 and 3, it leads us to conclude that in a competitive society such as ours, as long as well-being is culturally defined through the attributes of the currently dominant lifestyle, large house, suburbs, accumulation of stuff, and so on, we are hopelessly stuck in the consumerist arms race, which is insatiable and in and in itself does not make people happy. Okay, but what if the circumstances impose a tighter personal budget? What if if the circumstances necessitate greater interdependency among people? What if a large and self-aware population chooses lifestyles that are financially constrained but create opportunities for a collective pursuit of well-being? What if people's competitive streak draws on attributes other than consumer goods? Here, I come back to the role of cities, and I want to propose a rudimentary scenario of sorts for the future. The scenario is about the millennials, the 50 million people in the age of between low 20s and mid-30s. Two relevant facts about the millennials. One, their economic prospects are uncertain and their economic mobility is stunted. Two, their interest in suburban lifestyle model is waning. Great majority of them state that they would like to live in city centers. This latter finding is really a huge shift in lifestyle preferences, actually reminiscent of their grandparents' post-war move from the cities to the suburbs. We, of course, don't know how many of the millennials will actually live in the cities once they have families. But those that will have to redefine their aspirations for good life as less bound up with material consumption. Apartments in the cities are expensive, leaving less discretionary income, living space is smaller, owning a car is a burden. So with constrained finances, they may have to depend more on collaborative and reciprocal modes of organizing, housing, childcare, procuring fresh food, maintaining personal mobility. They may engage in more swapping, bartering, and shared ownership. Cities, with all their public spaces, public art, and other amenities for collective, not private, use, are of course perfect places for these kinds of lifestyle changes. These collaborative and reciprocal lifestyles may richly compensate for the declining purchasing power of millennials by strengthening the sense of community and social trust, all essential, as we know, for sense of well-being. And the sheer size of this group of people and their social media-based interconnectedness increases the probability that the incremental individual lifestyle changes may evolve into what I call a shared consciousness, shared collective consciousness, and an emergence of new framing of well-being, one that is radically different from that of the post-war generation. Note that the cultural transition in the above scenario is not driven by policy or civil society organizations. I see it more as a bottom-up process. But make no mistake, this transition is unlikely to succeed in the absence of active support from governments, local, state, perhaps federal. By one account, 20% of the US population belongs to managerial and professional class that might be able to afford current urban lifestyles. The remaining 80% are either struggling or are chronically poor. I'm not counting, if you went up to number, I'm not counting 1%. Top 1%. So without affordable housing for the modest income and middle income families the term smart cities and walkable cities will be euphemism for gentrification. It already is. So access to quality public education and mass transit, urban density urban design that increases densities while accounting for human well-being, deep awareness of the issues of equity are some examples of what is needed if we want to support this nascent emerging cultural transition. In short, human well-being and technological greening must progress in tandem. Otherwise, we cannot move this way.